Nico Hulkenberg is an F1 driver who many fans have regarded as a potential race winner for what seems like a million years now. But that's not at all the case anymore, and you'll understand why in just a second if you listen to these stats. 207 race starts, 13 years of action on track, 1 pole position, and absolutely no wins or finishes in the top 3 throughout those 13 years whatsoever. So now you might understand why the name Nico Hulkenberg and the word podium should be on opposite ends of the universe. How exactly do you go from a young prospect to one of the most commonly joked about topics in the F1 community? Some say it's because of the teams he's raced at were just straight up ass, some say it's simply the result of bad luck and being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and some say he just hasn't got what it takes. You see, Hulkenberg made his F1 debut 13 years ago at a little team known as Williams. I don't know, maybe you've heard of them before. 9 Constructors' Championships, 114 wins, and of course the former home of the legend himself, Nicholas Latifi. There Hulk managed a freaking pole position in his very first season in the sport at one of the best tracks on the calendar, Interlagos. Now sure, conditions were wet, and that was definitely the major factor that contributed to his first and only pole position. But how often do you hear of a rookie taking pole in F1? If your answer to that is anything other than never, you're a liar. Anyway, while that sounds good as gold, that's about all there was to highlight that year. And so because of that, and a little cheese from Venezuela, Nico was dropped in favor of arguably the greatest talent we've ever seen in this sport, Pastor Maldonado. So now teamless and on the cold streets of whatever paddock he was left at, Nico was forced to fend for himself. Up until he was signed by Force India, of course, as a reserve driver and then upgraded to an actual driver role the following year alongside yet another legend, Paul Di Resta. At his home Grand Prix in Hockenheim, Nico impressed by qualifying in P4, and later in Belgium, he managed an actual P4 in the race. But it was Brazil that stood out that year yet again, where he almost won the damn race. Alright, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but just a little. Now sure, Brazil 2012 can of course be remembered for other things. But I'm a positive guy, right? Let's not go there. So after Alonso forgetting to, steer left on lap 5 of the Grand Prix, that allowed Hulkenberg to escape the pack of much faster cars behind him, and from there the guy just decided, you know what, screw this, I'll just be the greatest freaking driver on the grid just this once, and flew into the lead after pulling some bangers on the McLarens ahead of him. From there, he continued to lead the race for 30 laps up until Hamilton woke up and thought to himself, how on God's green earth is there a Force India ahead of me? Caught back up and snatched the lead right out of his hands. Now from here, any mentally sane person would have been calm and collected, taken the podium, and went home with a trophy. But you already know that's not how the story goes. Instead, Nico sent a big one down the inside on the Senna S. Keep in mind, that's exactly where Alonso pretty much died just a few laps prior. And well, let's just say instead of driving home in a silly, happy, goofy mood, playing whatever song was on the radio and just all round having a good time with a podium to his name, he was more likely very tempted to hug one of those trees on the side of the road at 300 kilometers an hour instead. Anyway, he left Force India that year and went to Sauber of all teams. And in 2013, Sauber made an absolute tractor that looks like it ran on vegetable oil and could possibly outdrag an electric scooter. But even that couldn't keep the man down. That year, Hulk made the best of it and managed to qualify P3 in Monza, where he ended up finishing 5th, and also finished an impressive 4th in Korea, ahead of the dynamic duo Alonso and Hamilton behind him. Now, you may know about the whole Raikkonen Lotus fiasco that went down that year. Lotus made a contract they couldn't keep up with, and so Kimi, after basically sending them crying to the bank and its investors, was looking to leave Lotus early because the numbers in his bank account hadn't doubled like they were supposed to. So who did they approach to replace the Iceman for the last couple of races? That's right, Nico freaking Hulkenberg. Now, it's important to understand just how fast Lotus was that year. Raikkonen and Grosjean the legend finished in P5 and P7 in the championship. Kimi just barely missing out to Lewis Hamilton and Mark Webber ahead of him. And of course, as an F1 driver, you're constantly looking to have the fastest car underneath you to prove yourself with. So by that logic, you'd think Nico would have crunched the numbers, realized the chance he was being given, and taken Lotus up on that offer pretty quickly, right? Well, no, he pulled a smooth brain move and declined that offer just to go back to Force India the following season. I don't know if that was supposed to be one of those being the bigger man kind of moves where he doesn't want to leave his current team like that because it doesn't sit right with him, but in a sport as ruthless as F1, where come tomorrow you could get replaced by daddy's little princess because he has more money than you, there's no room for those kind of stupid decisions. You take the opportunities you're given. So like I said, the next year, 2014, was spent at Force India. And so was the year after that. and the year after that. The idea was that Force India were praying for that Merc engine to help them become one of those unlikely success stories. But that obviously never happened. And also, we're talking about Force India here, come on. Hulk had a promising start that year, where he had 6 top 6 race finishes in the first 7 races. But it all took a nosedive from there. But hey, at least he beat Perez pretty convincingly that year. The rest of his time at Force India was, I guess you could say, alright. That's the best word I can use, because ultimately he never managed anything particularly special with them thereafter, other than a couple of near podium finishes. Sure, he did tend to outqualify Perez, but at this point we knew about Hulk's fast quali pace, and truthfully, Perez has always been a bit of a snail on Saturdays too. So ultimately that didn't mean all too much since he was clattered by the Mexican in the standings anyway. He did on the other hand win Le Mans with the LMP1 Porsche team that year. And that's an absolutely enormous achievement for any driver. But all that really told us was that he was indeed a great racer. And we knew that already. He just hadn't done anything with his talent just yet. So in 2017, he joined the Renault Works team in hopes of a new beginning, and as a present, they gave him a nuke on wheels to work with. But even with that, he was only beaten in qualifying once that whole year and managed some pretty decent performances like qualifying P5 and finishing P6 at Silverstone. Again, that car was an absolute piece of crap, so he did do pretty well considering what he had to work with. Then in 2018, he beat Carlos Sainz and finished P7 in the driver's standings, only behind the Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull drivers who dominated the podium places. Anyway, that happiness quickly went away after he was beaten brutally the next year by a Daniel Ricciardo who at the time could still drive. Daniel also beat him in qualifying, where Nico was traditionally pretty good at. Now, as bad as that is, you know this wouldn't be a real Nico Hulkenberg story if he hadn't lost out on a podium in horrible fashion. You know, as he does. In Germany at his home race in Hockenheim, the track was soaked. The race was nuts, and by that I mean there was a crash happening left and right. With just over half the race to go, Nico found himself in P2, and with the track being wet, that equalized the performance differences between his car and the usually much faster Mercedes of Valtteri Bottas behind him. But like I said, it's not a proper Hulkenberg story without the chance of a podium being trick shot into the bin. On lap 41, he understeered, went off track, hit the brakes, but the track was too slippery, and so the wheels did this funny little thing called locking up and sent him face first into the barriers. And yeah, that was the end of that. He was dropped in favor of Esteban Ocon at the end of the year, and so he left F1 with 177 race starts and a total of 0 podiums to his name. Now, sure, he's back now, but the podium situation's not going to change anytime soon, because, well, he's racing for Haas. But that does really summarize his career as a whole pretty well, doesn't it? It really has been a combination of being in the wrong place at the wrong time and his own muck-ups at times that have really stopped him from being more in the world of Formula 1. Because in F1, you're only as good as your last race. So these podiums really do matter. They give you something to be remembered by, whereas having nothing kind of gives people nothing to remember. Ultimately, I hate that this is what Nico is known for. It's a brutal record to hold. I do make fun of a lot of drivers that I genuinely don't believe deserve their seats. But looking back on his career, Hulkenberg has always been fast. He's always had that raw pace and talent. He almost won a damn race for crying out loud. But that's not what people will remember, is it? It's kind of sad, but it's the reality of the situation, and it's probably not going to change anytime soon at Haas unless they pull a Braun GP. But I don't know, let me know what you guys think. Anyway, that's about all I've got to say. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of whatever this is, check out some of my other videos, and with that, I'll see you later. Bye bye.